Political Science Department of Shaheed Bhagat Singh College, in association with NMML, are elated to present to you all our International Conference on Mahatma Gandhi and the political thought stemming from the works of the father of our nation in the 150th anniversary of his birth. We invite you all to listen, learn, and interact with our eminent scholars as they share their work with us today. May I now request Shri Shakti Sinha ji, Principal Dr. Anil Sardana, and other distinguished guests to give an auspicious start to the day by lighting the ceremonial lamp. We would appreciate if you kept the applause going to commemorate the beginning of our event. We would now like to take a moment to show our appreciation to our eminent panel by felicitating them with a small token of gratitude. I now request Shri L.S. Hokep, Research Officer from the Research and Publication Department of NMML, to kindly felicitate Shri Shakti Sinha ji with a token of our appreciation. Please welcome sir with a huge round of applause. I now request Kharbanda sir to felicitate our Principal sir as we extend our gratitude towards him with a loud round of applause. I now request Sangeeta ma'am to felicitate our first eminent scholar of the day, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay. Let's welcome them with a huge round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, we request you to keep the applause going as we welcome our eminent guests for the day. I now request Praveen sir to kindly felicitate Professor Kian with a memento signifying our appreciation and deepest gratitude for his presence here today. Ladies and gentlemen, let's keep the applause going. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to introduce Shri Shakti Sinha Ji, Director of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. Sinha Ji was a member of India's highest civil service, the Indian Administrative Service, from 1979 to 2013. He has held positions in different capacities at the federal, provincial, and local levels, including as private secretary to the former Prime Minister Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee as head of Delhi's power utility, finance secretary in Delhi provincial government, and as chief secretary of the Andaman government, among others. Internationally, he has headed the United Nations Governance and Developmental Team in Afghanistan, coordinating donor support to the Afghan government, and was also called a senior advisor to Executive Director on the World Bank Board. I would now like to invite Sir on stage to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Principal Anil Sardana, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, Professor Taj Baksh, Dr. Simple Mohanty, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this 2-day, really wide-ranging, if I may say so, conference. If I look at the scholars and I look at the topics being covered, I think it's really comprehensive. We are in the process of celebrating Mahatma Gandhi's 150 years. I remember when we celebrated his centenary in 1969. 1969 was a very important year in India for various reasons. Politically, it was very important. We had the Congress split, lots of things happening. We had the landing on the moon in August. We had the Gandhi centenary in October. And I remember as a young school student, grade 8, preparing 2 large projects, one on the moon landing and one on Mahatma Gandhi. And I was particularly lucky that living in Ranchi those days, that a very close disciple of the Mahatma, Vinoba Bhave, was then living in Ranchi. So I spent some time with him trying to understand the Mahatma. Though obviously at age 13 you have a different perspective. And we were also lucky that year that Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the tallest leaders of India, who obviously never forgave Congress and Gandhi in that sense for the partition, spent some time in India, traveling all over India, reminding us about Mahatma and reminding us in his own way why he thought that we had gone wrong. And I think that is very, very important to understand. Anybody, Gandhi definitely, but anybody, is try to see that what they said, what they did, obviously there was no consistency to it. It was contextual also. Sometimes universal, sometimes contextual. How then does one make that person's life, that person's thoughts relevant today? So whether the time for Gandhi has come, an idea whose time has come, is something which will keep on, we debated then 150 years ago, and we are debating now. I'm glad this debate is going on, and as I said, I was very, very impressed with the kind of attitudes that you are, kind of different aspects. The famous Gandhi-Ambedkar conversation, which obviously can be seen from different ways. And recently, when the book Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste was reissued, the introduction to the book is by Arundhati Roy is longer than the book itself. And it's more about the Mahatma than Dr. Ambedkar. But that's another issue altogether. In this day and age, when we see it, every age is the age of transition. It's just that you feel it more because you're present right now. But in terms of technological growth that is happening, in terms of the fact that you can produce more and more out of less and less. So on one hand, you have productivity growth, on the other hand, you have loss of employment going together. On one hand, we all aim to have a high quality of life, which obviously entails a much larger consumption of resources. Can the earth, the earth will sustain itself. Can human beings really find life sustainable over the long run on this earth? I have no fear of Mother Earth. Mother Earth will survive us all. It survived the dinosaurs for 100 million years, it will survive us. No big deal. But whether the kind of lifestyle that we have developed, can that be sustainable over a long term or not? Especially now that China has grown so much and India is picking up. So 40% of humanity moving fast. What does that imply? Again, as an example. So I'm not being prescriptive, I'm not trying to limit the discussion, but the whole point is that there's so many aspects to Gandhi that hopefully we shall listen and hopefully carry on the dialogue, because this is something which can never end. A process of dialogue is not a process which should have an end, because again, as I said, the context changes, the meanings change. And Gandhi was asked once that you are contradicting yourself. He said, yes. Whichever is my latest statement on the subject, just listen to that. Forget what I've said in the past. Because you evolve, you change with times. And that again is a reality that the young must understand. That what they learn today in college, in school, will be completely irrelevant tomorrow. But what you do learn is a process of learning which will stand you in good stead. So please look upon this conference, and the experts will be speaking on it, more from the point of view of learning how to dialogue, learning how to question, learning how to make sense of what is being said, rather than what is being said itself, which is important, but not so important in the long term. So once again, let me welcome all of you. I'm glad that we can support this process. In Nehru Memorial, which is for those of you who have come for the first time, this is the premier platform for research. We don't research. Scholars come here and research. We are the best resource on contemporary and modern India anywhere in the world, I can say so proudly. I have no role to play. I've been here only 2 years. The institution is 54 years old. We have built up this tremendous amount of resources here, and now we've been interacting with undergraduate institutions. We've run a program of Padre Sahib in Banaras with the DAV, one of the 4 constituent colleges. We've done programs in Allahabad. We've done programs in Gangtok, Shillong, Mizoram, Kerala, Udaipur, as an example, Chandigarh, number of places, with undergrads and of course universities. Basically, the whole idea is again to create a larger community of scholars interacting with each other, critiquing each other, and learning from each other. So this is in our own small way, I'm trying to help, not really help, but to encourage and provide a platform for this conference to take place. I welcome all of you and wish proceedings all success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A truly wonderful way to begin our discussions for the day. I would now like to welcome our beloved principal, Dr. Sardana. Dr. Sardana, alumnus of Shaheed Bhagat Singh College, University of Delhi, is working as acting principal of the college. Having acquired his PhD in the area of human resource management, he has authored books in Leadership Mantra, Skill Development in India, and Human Resource Management. He has published many research papers in both national and international journals. Dr. Sardana, concept developer, conducts training programs for learning life skills, leadership, and entrepreneurship development. He is convener of SPSC Center for Skill Development and PM Yuva Yojana Center in the college for running add-on courses on entrepreneurship to improve student capacity, competence, and entrepreneurial skills. I request Sir to deliver the special address on this August occasion with a huge round of applause.
Thank you. Mr. Shakti Sinha, Director, Nehru Memorial Museum, Professor Upadhyay from Malvi Center, BHU, Professor Taj Baksh from Columbia University, Convener Dr. Simple Mohanty, Dr. Parveen Jha, Co-Convener, teachers of the Department of Political Science who have made it possible, along with the students, student leader, Ms. Diksha, delegates who have come from various universities, institutes and research centers, and my dear students. I really congratulate you in the first instance that international conference is being organized by Department of Political Science of our college. I am thankful to all the learned speakers, authorities on the subject who have really traveled a very, very long distance to share with you their knowledge, wisdom on the issue and the subject which is of really prime importance as on date. The subject of the conference, the Gandhian Way, is really very relevant. I was reading about autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi, been to Sabarmati Ashram as well as to place of his birth, Porbandar, have interest in his way of functioning, ideology, thinking, philosophy, leadership. And I believe that Gandhiji has always emphasized that you have to stay with the truth. Truth prevails. And at many places and his autobiography he has always said, and the real truth is ahimsa, non-violence. We know that the world is growing very fast. We are moving to the highly materialistic world where our thinking, our attitude, our behavior is changing. Change is inevitable. Change is definitely welcome because with the passage of time, the change comes. But the point is whether that change is good for you, good for the society, good for the nation, or good for the world at large. These are the various questions which need to be discussed, which need to be deliberated from the different point of view, keeping in view the seminar's theme. I'm sure that this seminar is definitely going to help you in many ways. Learning about Mahatma Gandhi, learning about the various experts, their views on his philosophy, his way of managing the masses. When I read about Mahatma Gandhiji, it says that he was the gentleman who could bring so many people together. A lot of following, a lot of acceptability. And that is the real leadership. If you are able to take so many people along with you, that is the real skill. He has given a message to you. Non-violence, ahimsa, truthfulness, patience, listening, taking people together. If you are able to develop these skills and at the same time you adopt modernity, because definitely it is not the same time when it was 1947. It is not the same time it was 1967 or 87. It is now 2019. Definitely thought system, value system, ethics are changing. Style of functioning is changing. As the elders, we have to accept what our younger generation is looking for. But at the same time, it is our duty also to share with our younger generation that the speed at which you are going, it may not be as beneficial for you, but that speed should be combined with ethics, values, and basic of the life, and that is truthfulness, ahimsa, non-violence, patience, togetherness. I congratulate the whole Department of Political Science because everybody has worked. Such a big seminar, international conferences cannot be organized by one person. It is always the joint efforts. I belong to Department of Commerce. I know I have organized 4 or 5 conferences. I know what it takes, what kind of efforts one has to put. Everybody, if it is a cohesive team, then only the results can come. And I am impressed by the cohesiveness of Department of Political Science. And I congratulate them, being led by Dr. Simple Mohanty and Parveen Jha. There are other teachers also who are really very good, who have worked for the success of this conference. I congratulate the department, and one thing is there that we have some problem in our college that we don't have auditorium. And we are working very hard to see to it, because Parveenji was saying me, sir, we expect you that you will build the auditorium. Definitely there will be auditorium in our college very soon. Number one, we will have one multi-purpose mini auditorium we are going to have. That is in the sports ground. You must have seen that a lot of mud has been removed from there. There you will have a multi-purpose mini auditorium which can house around 100 delegates. And then we will have a bigger auditorium in the college near the main lawns. Soon you will see that you will be able to organize your programs in the college. I once again congratulate all of you and look forward to have very good resolutions coming out of this. One thing I will suggest, that every student need to be told about the deliberations as well as the results of this conference. So, such a good speakers we have, and we are making the record of that also. I will expect the department to make a summary of that along with the summary of the addresses given by the different authorities, and keep that in our library, so that those students who have not been able to come today and are interested, and they must read about, listen about, view about Gandhiji and Gandhiji's philosophy and his way of working. And one more thing I will suggest my students, that all of you should buy autobiography of the Mahatma Gandhi. It is not expensive. That book must be in your cabinet, and I will just show you. This is the kind of book. This book you must buy from the market, and you should keep always with you. If you will read even once or twice, as if you will feel as if you are reading Bhagavad Gita, and that will be the sense of life which will help you to improve your personality. Once again, my good wishes, congratulations to the whole department, and once again, thanks to all the people who have come from various places to our organization, Shaheed Bhagat Singh College, and thanks to Professor Shakti Sinha for allowing us to do this and collaborating with us to reach to this level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It is with great pride that I now introduce Dr. Simple Mohanty, who is also the convener for our conference today. Ma'am is an assistant professor of political science at Shaheed Bhagat Singh College and a freelance artist. She started her teaching career in 2009 in Shaheed Bhagat Singh, prior to which she has worked as a journalist with The Statesman and the Indian Express. With a degree in print journalism from Asian College of Journalism, Chennai, she did her master's in political science from Hindu College and MPhil and PhD from the Department of Political Science, Delhi University. Her research interests include political theory, religion and politics in Jammu and Kashmir, and intellectual history, especially in the South Asian context. She has published papers in these areas with prominent publications like Sage and Routledge. With great fervor, we now invite Dr. Simple Mohanty, convener of the conference, to elucidate the conceptualization for today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Shivangani. Esteemed Chair and Director, Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, Shri Shakti Sinha ji. Respected Principal Sir, Dr. Anil Saldana ji. Our very eminent keynote speakers for the day, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay ji and Professor Kian Tajbakhsh, august audience, and my dear colleagues and students. I welcome you all on this occasion, and I am beholden to all of you from the bottom of my heart for the kind support extended by all of you, without which this conference could not have seen the light of day. Just to set the theme of the conference, the proposed conference with the theme "The Gandhian Way, an idea whose time has come," seeks to bring together Gandhi scholars, political philosophers, theorists, historians, intellectuals, and last but very importantly, students, and set them conversing about and engaging with the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi, which has and continues to influence leaders and change makers across the globe. If anything, it is more germane today than ever before, as Gandhi was prescient in his apprehensions about the sustainability of resource energy-intensive, consumer-driven industrial growth. The nature of the moral, economic, ecological, political, ethnic, and sectarian crisis, we don't have to stretch the imagination much. It's all here before us. The smog, the pollution, the violence fits that we see in our society. They're all there before us, right? So these, the nature of these moral, all these crises have spurred many scholars who have found the existing epistemological negotiations wanting in suitably explaining these problems, these crises, or transforming them towards interventions of an ontological and a philosophical kind. In the backdrop of this creative quest and academic churning, it would be apt to revisit the thoughts and practices of Gandhi with his passionate claims for a situational truth and an alternative modernity. Gandhi's life message of truth and love transcends global boundaries and echoes across millennia. I'm quoting Stanley Wolpert, a scholar, a very eminent scholar on Gandhi. And in Gandhi's own words, truth, love, nonviolence, these are as old as the hills. Calling them the twin faces of God. God to Gandhi is its truth. Gandhi charted a unique course of life that involved listening to one's inner voice to overcome the challenges facing him and his oppressed countrymen, whether in South Africa or in India. His experiments with truth led him to discover nonviolent satyagraha, a powerful tool in the hands of the subjugated anywhere in the world, arming them to speak truth to power and resist unfair laws. However, his quest for truth was a holistic life affair and not just preoccupied with reshaping and redefining the political. It found expression not simply in his writings on an alternative modernity, most notably in the Hind Swaraj, but in his life. For Gandhi, he has often quoted that let what I have written be interred with my bones after I'm gone. What matters is practice. What matters, and he believed in a complete unison between thought, word, and deed. So, through his emphasis on moral force and primacy of ethics in political or social life, Gandhian practice resolved the tension between individual freedom and social order that has been confronting Western political philosophers at least since the dawn of modernity. This was thanks to his belief in the correlation of rights and duties in the moral universe, which is reflected in this biblical quote as well as in the wisdom of many Eastern philosophies, including ours. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. So without much ado, I would just like to put forth the questions that this conference seeks to grapple with. As Shakti ji has said, it's more important than the content is the process of questioning, learning, evolving. So this seminar intends to grapple with the following questions. Are our times crying out for transformational leadership along Gandhian lines? Can the discomfiture of some in India with Gandhi be explained by the logic of a post-truth age? Are his ideas more suited to a people who have experienced material prosperity, been there, done it all, with their appetite for a creative and spiritual activism awakened, as compared to the developing world, which is still aping the West in a bid to lap up material prosperity? What were the dialogues of Gandhi with his contemporaries? Since Gandhi never constructed a grand theory or an ism, can even a little bit of Gandhi in our lives, in our own different ways, fend off many a social evil and crisis? The intent of this conference is neither to portray the Gandhian way as a meta-narrative, of which Gandhi was himself wary, because meta-narratives claim a final and objective truth, nor is it a hagiographic retelling, but to rescue his thought and practice equally from hagiographic and distorted interpretations. I eagerly look forward to the day's deliberations and end once more by thanking Shri Shakti Sinha ji and our principal sir for the very kind support extended. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Few very enlightening thoughts. We will now be having an anthem commemorating the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi and all that he stood for. Could we please have a huge round of applause for the same?
That you hear is of hatred and fear, when the wars and the killings abound. You know there's so much to change, to reform, rearrange, in the noise and confusion around. Then the wisdom of sight must give way for the light, and your heart is impelled by a voice. It says the morning will break if you're ready to make that one decisive choice. To be the change you want to see, to be the best you're meant to be, to take whatever's wrong and right it with your life. You want to hear that inner call, you give your best, your very all, to make it happen, the difference by your life. Hear our children crying, see our aged dying, watch our millions go hungry to bed, while the nation's elite gather more than they need at the cost of the underfed. Now this communal hate has endangered our fate. Peace is so unreal it would seem. You know the time has come, something's got to be done to stand up for your dream. To be the change you want to see, to be the best you're meant to be, to take whatever's wrong and right it with your life. You want to hear that inner call, you give your best, your very all, to make it happen, the difference by your life. We'll be the change we want to see, we'll be the best we're meant to be, we'll take whatever's wrong and right it with our lives, our lives. you hear that enough call? We'll give our best, our very all to make it happen. The difference by our lives.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank Professor Peter Gonzalez for sharing this beautiful anthem with us today. Please let's give him a huge round of applause. Thank you, sir. It is with great pride and honor that we now invite our first keynote speaker for the day, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay. Widely regarded as the pioneer of peace studies in India, Professor Upadhyay holds the UNESCO Chair for Peace and Intercultural Understanding at Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. He also heads the Malviya Center for Peace Research situated in the university. Professor Upadhyay holds MPhil and PhD degrees from Jawaharlal Nehru University. He also holds advanced international diplomas in conflict resolution from the Uppsala University in Sweden. Professor Upadhyay has done postdoctoral research at London University and the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars in Washington, D.C. He was selected for the Guest Scholar Award of the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars, Faculty Research Award, Canadian Government in 1999, and Senior Fulbright Award in 2004. We invite Sir on stage to share his work on exploring Gandhi's vision on non-violence and sustainable peace. Please put your hands together for Professor Upadhyay.
How can I fix this here? Can I just remove this? That's nice. Thank you so much, Dr. Simple, for your generous introduction and also getting me here. Shri Shakti Sinhaji, the director of Nehru Memorial, and somebody who is very popular in our friend circle, Principal Dr. Anil Sardhanaji, about whom I have been hearing constantly through his younger colleagues and students since I arrived yesterday. And I'm amazed that this very ambitious and large seminar is being held in a college, something that doesn't normally happen in these colleges. So, and of course to my other keynote presenter, Dr. I'm pretty bad at names, but Gandhian Way Tajbakhsh. I was just out of curiosity Googling him and this morning for 5 minutes, and I thought he's our man because he's an activist. He's somebody who practices peace studies, and as you know that peace studies is an experiential thing. It doesn't really lie and sleep with the books. So I was very excited that I'll be sharing this podium with him. And of course, not to miss the wonderful young people, the young students, and the colleagues who have really put in a lot of efforts to make this happen. So, yes, I have a few minutes. I was just exchanging notes with Kian, and he said that 30 minutes is a good time. And it's something like a blind man trying to find ways to describe Gandhi, and especially the fact that we have very eminent scholars of Gandhi sitting before me. We have Professor Alan Tuck, whom we know, Douglas Allen, sorry, we call him Tuck sometime, and we invited him to Banaras, and he's a very eminent scholar of Gandhian studies. And so it's quite a task, uphill task for me, what to pick up, what to really miss. But let me share one thing with you, that whenever there is a program on Gandhi, an event where you go as a listener or you go as a speaker, it's always a delight to share these ideas, because as in passing Sri Sinha said, it is about a methodology, not perhaps so much about what he said, or of course he said very powerful transformative thing. But the way Gandhi looks at the world, his Wantanshung, his worldview, his methodology is something that interests us every time we read something about it. And this time too, past 2-3 days, I was just trying to freshen up all that has been written about him. And it's amazing to see that after so many decades past him, and after perhaps, we can say, you don't have to agree with me, that the present world realities have more or less short-served Gandhi. I mean, we have the way the civilization is progressing, the way the nation states are evolving their development and their other trajectories. One can safely say that Gandhi has actually not been listened to substantially. We can say that he was rather ignored, if we can say so. Yet, there is so much that's being done on him. He continues to inspire leader, activist, common men and women all over the world in a manner that is indeed unprecedented. I don't know of another philosopher, another thinker, another activist, another man who continues to inspire generations of activists and scholars the way he does it. Past 4 years, and that project is now over and the book is out, I was doing a project for UNESCO. And now we titled this project as The Long Walk of Peace, and towards conflict prevention. And at the last minute, I was the main author, actually. I was the one who compiled things and wrote the introduction and the substantial part of it. There was a big debate, because a lot of people at UNESCO, the many dozen scholars, activists, you know how the United Nations operate, they must take everybody's consensus. So the debate was the title of this particular thing. And a lot of people say the title should be Long Walk to Peace. And I fought, and finally I convinced them that there is no destination like peace. It is long walk of peace. And then came Gandhi to me. I quoted Gandhi. I said, Gandhi, peace is the way we live in. There is nothing like a junction, a train station, a hub where you would end up and say, well, peace has arrived. It's the way we live our life. It's the way we do our quotidian or routine things. So this was something Gandhi always helps you. Gandhi always fights, and still he enjoys a very vibrant appeal both within and outside India. And this is, as I said, despite our collective failure to live up to his transformative ideas. The world, the civilization is suffering in a manner that probably caught up in our own consumer lifestyle and our own increasingly busy schedule, we don't realize. But we are very close to a precipice. I mean, I was trained as an international relationist, a political scientist. And after the Cold War was over, we had started saying that, well, finally it's over. The dividend of peace, the passe détente and dividend of peace and so on and so forth. But least we realize, and especially I worry for the young generation, that today the global realities are very harsh, very dangerous. I mean, we have to imagine that both the Russia and the US have about 2,000 ready to launch missiles ready, just half trigger as they say. One mistake and it's all over. And somewhere at the end I have just quoted the recent data to which, well, I'll come to that, that almost 13% of global GDP is being spent on military hardwares and so on and so forth. In South Asia too, which was the birthplace of not only Mahatma Gandhi, but so many wonderful religions of peace, Hinduism itself, Buddhism, Jainism. We are in a very sad situation. The doctrine of deterrence prevails circumstantially, or it's difficult. We have all the right ideas in place, but still the upheavals, the strife, the unease is there. So I agree with you, Dr. Simple, that an idea whose time has come. I think if we had heard Gandhi and people like him, Gandhi was, as you know, he was always very candid in saying that there is nothing very original that he's coming out with. He was so honest about it. I mean, I asked one researcher to discover what was it that Gandhi said which he doesn't attribute to someone else. But that's the mark of a Mahatma leader. He would always draw from different religions, different cultures, never claim monopoly over truth. I mean, they're very... this morning there was a mention of Akil Belgrami from Columbia University. There was in passing, Kian was mentioning. And there's a big treatise, big debate going on. And people say that one of the very simple thing Gandhi did was that he said there is no version of truth. Truth changes all the time. And so if I say I have the monopoly, I can tell you what is morally correct, what is truthful. That is perhaps will be misleading. This was Gandhi. And this was his secret, to do so many things and practice so many things. And now we, of course, there is a debate whether Gandhi actually, it is Gandhi's dictum or not, that be the change you want to be. Whether it was he who said it or not is not important. But Gandhi said it in so many words, in so many ways, that you have to, mansa vacha karmana, you have to do things in order to have things. So today, that is how, despite all the dismal scenario, Gandhi inspires. And I wrote somewhere in passing, Gandhi fights back. We all have Gandhi within ourselves. It fights back. It makes you realize that the futility of war, violence, hatred, sometimes circumstantially, sometimes when you lead societies and communities, you have to play with their, security anxieties. It becomes probably mandatory on the part of leader. But then we have Gandhi within ourselves. And even worst of leaders who led armies or who are declared to be very aggressive leaders, in their softer moments, they discovered Gandhi within themselves. And this is precisely what Gandhi knew. And that is precisely what he used to argue, that you have to bring that Gandhi out of the person, whether it was his not so popular letter or conversation with Winston Churchill, or in his own way when India met with even issues like Kashmir and when he was still alive. He believed that it can be brought out. The little Gandhi lives within ourselves. The challenge is how we bring it out. And today, I not only do peace studies, I do security studies, so many studies, but no conversation on modern civilization or the civilizational issues can take place without mentioning, or being inspired by Gandhi. Such has been the sway of this man. Today, there's so much that can be discussed about. There's so many facets that Gandhi has actually inspired, so many disciplines. For instance, if you look at, peace studies, he has made a unique contribution which both activists and researchers both realize. I would remain focused just on the way Gandhian ideas, beliefs and methodologies have influenced the way the concept of peace has evolved. We all know that peace is not simply the absence of violence. Now everybody knows it. This is a part of our thinking. And we talk about positive peace. And we talk about the absence of both direct and indirect violence. And I will, for a few minutes, focus on the foundational contribution which Gandhi made by highlighting the aspect of indirect violence. The person, the scholar, the so-called founding fathers, there's a big debate, Johann Galtung, I think we can't miss this name. Everybody knows it, even you don't have to do. I think he's in 90s, still cynical, but great scholar, great philosopher. But he gave a term which I think all young people might have heard differently, structural violence. That violence is embedded in these structures, whether these structures of caste, whether it is in your language, whether it is the question of gender, and so on and so forth. And I had the occasion of working with Johan Galtung a couple of times. And we had a big debate and very interesting parts. I'll get diverted, so I'll not go there. But once, the minute he met with me first time, it was, I think, mid-80s, and he discovered that I'm from Banaras, and then he took me aside and he said, I discovered the basic ethos of structural violence sitting in your city, in Varanasi, in Institute of Gandhian Studies. This Jayaprakash Narayan had picked it up in bad shape now. And I said, how come? And he said, just 2-3 words of Gandhi: hate the sin, not the sinner. Now this triggered off a thinking, and then I looked more deeply into the way Gandhi is looking around, or looking into the social political issues of his time. And then came the idea of structural violence, which I think is one of the most powerful concepts and methodology to detangle, to understand violence. This brings me to with a footnote, I should say, we have a lot of substantial knowledge, very instructive in our own tradition, in Indian tradition. The problem has been, and I think it still is, that we are not able to package it properly. We still need to bring it out in a more sort of, global terms if India has to really reclaim and achieve the glory, the leadership which many of its leaders, religious leaders, cultural leaders, social leaders had really come out with. So along with this goes his conception of holistic peace. Gandhi was very categoric that he would never mention ahimsa alone. Ahimsa, satyagraha, swadeshi, swaraj and sarvodaya. It all goes together. Just listen, sarvodaya, the udaya of everybody, the development, the growth of everybody, swaraj, swadeshi, satyagraha and ahimsa. Gandhi took a holistic view of peace, and that's where I began by saying that for Gandhi, peace was just a way, a methodology rather than some achievements. And mind you, precisely these notions have finally prevailed over the United Nations. The very recent conceptualization of sustaining peace, which the Secretary General has come out with, it says upfront, peace is all about the Sustainable Development Goals. All the 16 Sustainable Development Goals together make what peace is. Peace is not simply about India, Pakistan, or Russia, America, or violence, etc. Peace is about development. Peace is about growth. Peace is about culture. Peace is about the way we live. Peace is about gender justice. So these notions were so intrinsic to Gandhi at point of time. And he was not an academic like we are, specializing in conceptualizing. He could see things very clearly. And in my mind, and I don't pretend to be a great scholar at all, forget about a Gandhian scholar, I believe what Gandhi gives me is to always look for an alternative vision. He is never suppressed or bound by the paradigms, as we these days say this, the dominance of knowledge, which is mostly constructed. Sometimes we use Michel Foucault's or paradigm, etc., etc. He would always question. For him, everything was so simple. And listen, one time I was just going through some of his writings, and I found a sentence which had an eerie similarity to somebody who was just very antithetical, and that was Karl Marx. Karl Marx, he doesn't get a job in Berlin University, he returns there. And David McClellan is one of his more authentic biographer, has recorded it. So Marx is back to Berlin University and is facing the students. And the students say, you've become a great philosopher, great activists, tell us one thing which we should learn, just one simple sentence. And Marx said, discover the simplest of truth yourself. Discover the simplest of truth yourself. Precisely this is what Gandhi had to say. And I just then thought, I mean, you like Marx or don't like Gandhi, etc. But people who grow over these or take altitude, they realize that truth is not anybody's monopoly or hegemony. And discover the simplest of truth yourself. And this is precisely what Gandhi did. He was never cowed down by what the existing knowledge was. And so he goes. He goes to the extent of decrying state as an apparatus, not nation. And says that probably state is an instrument of coercion, so we need to be more cautious about it. Probably he says that one of the causes of war and violence is the territorial state. And then he goes to build this concept of Jai Jagat, borderless world, for example, an idea which was... So, I think I'm not watching my watch, but very quickly, the other contribution that we must acknowledge, and especially young minds, peace by peaceful means. This is a major, major contribution which Gandhi did. He said, anybody who thinks that peace can be brought about through non-peaceful means is living in a fool's paradise. It's only by peaceful means and never by non-peaceful means that sustainable peace can be brought in. This is a major contribution. We have some very fine first-rate titles. John Galtung himself wrote his basic book on peace by peaceful means. I think this is something that we need to. Today, all the big territorial states, powerful countries, they go to different parts of the world and they want to create peace. So the United States goes to Middle East and it wants to create peace at the cost of thousands of people killed, and well, that's a different story. I'll come to a little point at the end very soon. I think Simpleji can just tell me 5 and 10 minutes. 5 to 7. From here? Okay. So we'll quickly wind up. Now, the best way to talk about Gandhi's non-violence is to just read what he has to say. Just Google it, see quotable quotes on non-violence, and you'll find fantastic one-liners, two-liners. And one thing which I'm very particular and which I always use is, and twice he said this in different ways, but one time, and I quote Gandhi, we are constantly being astonished at the amazing discoveries in the field of violence, but I maintain that far more undreamt of and seemingly impossible discoveries will be made in the field of non-violence. So the strength of non-violence is yet to be explored, I won't say fully, but even partially. And that is something that always Gandhi emphasized. One more thing. Some peace researchers and thinkers initially, especially the rationalist mode, the Western rationalism, etc., when people cost-benefit analysis, they call Gandhi utopian or Gandhi's euphoria and so on and so forth. But anybody who reads Gandhi carefully would know that Gandhi was upfront in emphasizing that peace is about pragmatism. Peace is not simply, and especially the younger generation, we have such, stereotypes that you apna gale ko de do, dusre ko de do, Gandhi, Gandhi mat bano. As if Gandhi was euphoric, Gandhi was practical. Every time, and we have very finest scholars sitting here, they will give you an inventory of things. On each episode, Gandhi described why non-violence is more pragmatic, more doable than violence. And he describes it. It was not simply that he was somebody who was a dreamer. He was a practical man. And he says, ahimsa is not the crude thing it has made out to appear. Not to hurt a living thing is no doubt a part of ahimsa, but it is least expression. It is heard by hatred of any kind, by wishing ill of anybody, by making a negative criticism of others. It does highest good of mankind, not merely in the next world, but in this world also. So one of the fundamentals of peace studies, peace research, conflict resolution studies has been to impress upon the public constituencies that peace is probably the most pragmatic thing, practical thing possible. And probably this notion still escapes our world level leaders sitting over the piles of arms, half trigger, 3,500 missiles ready. There was a scenario building. I do the security studies. In fact, my credentials are better in security studies. If I can passingly say that I am a visiting professor at the American Air Force Academy, so you can imagine. You're sitting over those piles, etc. And the scenario building was that somebody took out a note and said that in a possible confrontation between India and Pakistan does the misadventure, and there we have a better nuclear doctrine at least, since Vajpayee ji came out with a more sensible thing, no aggression first. But Pakistan tries to fire a missile, and it fails, and it falls down on Lahore. The consequence is Delhi is destroyed. So this is a dangerous world that we live in. And forget about the nearly 4,000 nuclear warheads that America, and still there is no mention about it. It's so painful to see that if you talk to younger generation about what is happening, United Nations has recently declared nuclear weapons illegal. No newspaper picked it up. No media, no coverage, no commentary, no knowledge. Even my political science friend wouldn't know. They wouldn't know that a right to peace has been passed by the United Nations after a struggle of over 2 decades. This is because our mind has become so full of only one type of thinking, and that thinking is that it is the force, it is the power, it is the deterrence which is important for survival. Right to peace is a right. It doesn't have a backing because United Nations is also suffering. And it's suffering in so many ways. Recently, last year, the Americans said UNESCO is hellish. We will not give any grant to it, and we will not support it. But anyway, long stories. We did a bit of structural violence. Cultural violence is something, another notion. Cultural violence is not about ethnic, communal thing. When we don't acknowledge certain acts as an act of violence. And this Gandhi was so perceptive to see that there are so many issues. And I'll give you a very simple example. He gives an example of student and teachers going late in the class. Or even, maaf kariyega, principal saab sitting there and student waiting there because he has important meetings to do. I do it all the time. So he looked up at these quotidian, everyday practices which violates human dignity. And today I'll tell you, the most recent approach to peace is given by, is conceptualized as quality peace, wherein human dignity is given the top slot. You have to respect the dignity of others. It's so miserable sometimes when we are young scholars, teachers, we will wait for weeks to meet the Vice Chancellor. And when you go there, this man is sitting with the telephone and you're waiting for your time to come because you have to tell him that you have to go out, you want to leave, and he's not talking to you, and suddenly he says, all right, we'll meet next week. Gandhi brings that all in. He says violence happens when we don't see that and act as a violence. So this is another for young minds. Ecological violence also he talked about. And then the tremendous way in which scholars and activists are building on Gandhism. It's not that it's become a hackneyed thing and after the 150th year is gone, everything will come to a standstill. No. There are a lot of people who are, showcasing the cross-cultural influence of Gandhi's non-violent activism. A lot of writings have come up and the thinkers, Mubarak Awad, Ram Das, Thich Nhat Hanh, and Shazar Chavez, Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, Joan Baez. These people come from different cultures in their own different ways. They have made a mark. And there are innovative works also which are I was particularly impressed, and I engaged with him also, this Mark Jurgens Meyer, who employed Gandhian approach tactically to demonstrate how conflicting parties can find mutually satisfying solutions by redirecting the focus of a fight from persons to principles, determine the truth of one's position in an argument, cope with an opponent who is not willing to negotiate, use the power of non-cooperation, and so on and so forth. There is plentiful I have written on these points that I want to go for a closure. The important thing is, and come back to that as young people, and we are all young. The definitions around as long as your mind is thinking, and the mind should think till you are alive. We need to think seriously about the non-violent options to deal with the situation. And for example, Gandhi had visualized this whole notion of Shanti Sena. And Gandhi used to believe that peace should be waged like war is waged. The Shanti Sena was a very potent concept. Unfortunately, just about he was assassinated. If he had planned a nationwide meeting of Shanti Sena, but his ideas were picked up by Jayaprakash Narayan and Vinoba Bhave, and Shanti Sena can still be, and time again we talk about it. Similar was the notion of, borderless world as we talk about Jai Jagat. These ideas lived for some time, but they did not get that kind of support, the systemic support, and so they didn't. The other thing that Gandhi was very emphatic, and which is highly ignored, if I can, use the term, is that teaching peace to the young children. If we are to teach real peace in the world, we shall have to begin with children. Gandhi offered valuable insights and inputs to various facets of peace education. I was just amazed, somewhere outside India, I was asked to speak on Gandhi and women, and I discovered from Mahatma Gandhi's writings, which are very well, very nicely available on the internet, and he had written a Bal Pothi, a primer for children, where he talks so smartly about the inculcating gender respect in a male child. There is a boy and a girl in conversation, and a mother in conversation. I had not read it. Maybe it's a common knowledge for the Gandhi scholars who are here, and profound ones. And he talks about why the male child should also learn cooking, and so on and so forth. So Gandhi could relate to these everyday violence situation we sometimes describe as routine violence, and he was able to also find a problem-solving thing. As I try to sum this all up, what comes in my mind is that we need to look at the power-based or realist approaches, deterrence-based approaches more seriously, more critically, and interrogate them. And also probably Gandhi always comes handy to interrogate the realist assumption that non-violence does not work in practical realm and is perhaps even antithetical to conflict resolution and peace. We need to question it more seriously, whether it is a question of India and Pakistan, or whether it is the global situation, whether in our own community, and probably in our own life, in our own relationship. Because we don't give it a serious thought, this whole hugely potential trajectories of non-violence and non-violence activism remains they evade our attention. And a lot of people actually have done this, this particular exercise to bring these things on the board. And Gene Sharp in particular, just Google him and see, he has made tremendous practical suggestions about how to introduce non-violent activism. And, in many ways, his works are being translated or have been translated in over 25 languages. And not that he agrees to Gandhi in all his understanding, but he, by and large, uses his methodology to highlight how non-violent activism, peaceful protest, can really bring about changes. So we need to focus on those things. At the end, I should say, it's not simply a matter of commemorating Gandhi's 150th birthday. It's not simply about, it's not a challenge whether you have to be a sannyasi or a Gandhi, or sometimes these days it is in fashion to start opposing some great thinker. Everybody has its plus and minus and deficits. But I think what Gandhi tells us is that there are practical ways to transform our world, to transform our environment, and probably to save this planet Earth from this precipice, from the challenge, great challenge that looks at us. As one of the very early United Nations Secretary General said it, that the world is overarmed and peace is underfunded. And I say it especially because past 30 years, 20 years, 30 years I have been doing peace studies, 20 years I'm leading a center of peace studies, and nobody wants to fund it. Peace, unfortunately, you do something on, and if I have to approach for a grant, I take out the other batch of security studies and national defense, etc. You see, the point is this: it's not they are any less important. In one of the very poignant sentences of the Human Security Now book, which is freely available, just write Human Security Now and you will find it. One of the most profound statement was that there is no contradiction between human security and state security. Actually, if you guard your human security well, you can guard your territorial security even better. And this is a realization that's finally dawning on them. Sometimes when I invited for these military academies and national security institutions, and I asked them, why are you inviting somebody who is peace? And then they say that, well, we need, who is most affected? It's the military, it's the armed forces, which gets the first brunt of warfare and violence. So basically, I think the peace studies need to be promoted at all levels, and probably Gandhi can be a very practical point and person to begin with all these random ideas. Let me once again thank each one of you for bearing with my loud, sometimes ventilating thoughts and expression, and wish you all the best and have a very nice seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your prestigious work with us today. It is my honor to welcome our next keynote speaker, Professor Kian Tajbakhsh, distinguished scholar. Professor Kian, PhD, Columbia, is Senior Advisor to the Executive Vice President for Global Centers and Global Development at Columbia University. He is also a fellow with Columbia's Committee on Global Thought and a professor of Urban Planning and Urban Studies. His research interests include a focus on competing paradigms of globalization and world order and on the challenges facing cities. He is currently completing a book on local government and democracy in Iran before joining Columbia. Sir has worked for 15 years as an international expert in 3 related areas of urban policy and local government reform, democracy and human rights promotion, and international social science research collaboration. His recent publications include What Are Iranians Dreaming About Today? Reflections on the Islamic Revolution at 40. Along with that, Authoritarian State Building Through Political Decentralization and Local Government Law. The Promise of the City from the University of California Press and Social Capital, Trust, Democracy and Development includes a long plethora of his prestigious work. Today, he will be addressing us on Gandhi's spiritual realism, and let us all welcome Sir with a rousing round of applause.
Is there a way to blank the screen when I don't want it to be up?
That will not be possible, sir. Is there a way to blank the screen?
Actually, if you could,
yes.
if you could keep the lights on in the hall.
Yeah, sure. That's your wish. Yeah. Sure.
Just keep the lights on.
Sure.
Okay. So.
Yeah, this is the pointer. I do want this one.
All right.
I don't believe.
Could we have the lights on in the hall? Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. Yes, the slides are not so important that I should not be able to see you. So I've traveled a long way to be with you, and so I'd like to see you in the audience. It is a great privilege to address such a distinguished audience of scholars and keen students to honor such a towering world figure. I thank Dr. Sardana, Dr. Pani for extending the kind invitation to me, and for Sri Sinha for hosting this event. Dr. Pani mentioned that we traveled a long way to get here. I was 17 hours in the plane, and it reminded me of an anecdote which I thought I would share with you at the risk of going over time. In 1984, I was extremely fortunate to be invited to visit India for the first time in my life. I was also especially fortunate that I didn't come here to visit an ashram, or I didn't come here to visit to do a yoga session, although I later on did do those things, and I liked them a lot. The reason was because I wanted to do a summer internship before I joined my graduate program at Columbia University to do my PhD. Some of you may know a very prominent scholar, American scholar called Cheryl Payer, who did work on the debt trap and on international development in the 1980s and 70s. She was a friend of mine. I spoke to her, and I said, I was born in Iran, and I was living outside of Iran, and I said, Cheryl, I wanted to go back to Iran this summer, but I was not permitted. I was not given a visa because I had to do military service, and there it was the time for the Iran-Iraq war. I said, Cheryl, so what should I do? And I want to do something interesting. She said, well, is there anywhere in the world you want to go? And I said, well, I don't speak many languages. I speak Farsi and I speak English. She said, would you like to go to India? I said, I don't know. What would I do there? She said, I'm going to write to my friends. I have lots of friends there, and I'm sure they can find you something to do. She wrote to Dr. Vandana Shiva, who was a close friend of hers, as some of you may know. And she wrote to Dr. Rajni Kotari, who was the head of CSDS and at the time. And if some of you don't know, I had one of the most fascinating experiences of my life. They said, okay, we need a summer intern to help us document indigenous irrigation systems around the country. And you could do that. Not knowing how big India was, or how hot India was during the summer, I said, terrific, I'm going to do this. I ended up in Delhi. To my astonishment, I arrived at 4 a.m. at Delhi airport. This is in 1986. And I was astonished that by 6 a.m. it was already about 40 degrees or 35 degrees. And I thought, my goodness, where's this going to be? Anyway, the first thing I was told is, get on a bus, go to Dehradun and meet Dr. Chattopadhyay, who worked with the Chipko movement, which in the north, and Dr. Vandana Shiva. This is taking up too much of my time about Gandhi, but I just cannot resist. So this also tells me about why I'm so invested in thinking about Gandhi. I went all the way to Dehradun. By the way, that was also an experience. I said, how do I get to Dehradun? They said, you go to a place called ISBT, and you get on a bus. And I said, any bus? They said, well, just find the first bus you can. I ran there, and I said, I need to get to Dehradun. And they said, you've got to get on this bus. it's leaving right now. And I said, that bus, and it was actually pulling out. And I rushed and I jumped on. And I got on this bus and I thought, uh-oh, there's nowhere to sit. And they said, well, that's it, we're on our way. Anyway, we got to Dehradun. All my bones were completely rattled by the time I got there. But I arrived there in the cool of the evening, and I was offered a wonderful juice from the lychee tree from Dr. Vandana Shiva's garden. Anyway, this was all to say that after a few days, I was sent back to Delhi and given my assignment. And my assignment was to work for Lokayan. And if those of you who don't know Lokayan, it was essentially a Gandhian grassroots organization spread across the entire country. And I was told, I want you to visit the entire length and breadth of India. And physically, because I was an engineering student and doing urban planning, we want you to document, I think they were called vadis? No, what are the tankas, which were the urban, old, ancient ways of irrigating water. Anyway, this is all to say that included in that trip was a trip I took to the ashram in Ahmedabad by a very, very prominent gentleman who I have to say is like a bit of a kind of dream figure for me. I know he was very prominent. I've forgotten his name. I don't know where he is anymore. We took an overnight trip on a bus, and this is the point of this story that I was reminded by Dr. Pani saying we've come such a long way. On this overnight trip we took on a bus, he asked me, he was a Gandhian activist. He asked me, he said, so, Mr. Kian, who do you think traveled more, St. Paul or Dr. Kissinger? I was young, obviously not very wise. I knew Kissinger was involved in shuttle diplomacy. And of course, I should have known it was a trick question, but I gave the wrong answer. I said, well, Kissinger. And he said, no, it was St. Paul. And that's because it's not the miles he traveled. It was the quality of his travel, even though he went on a donkey in a small area. The quality of travel was what was important for him. That was a very important lesson. And I just want to say, as an anecdote, that is a vote of thanks from me to all of you that it was worth traveling all this way to be with you again. So, with that digression, I would like to start my remarks by mentioning that the last time I spoke to a big audience like this, I was a prisoner of conscience addressing a packed courtroom in Tehran in a mass trial of activists arrested during the green protest movements of 2009. I had been arrested for non-violent activities promoting democracy and an open society. Of course, I was aware of Gandhiji before that time. I had been invited, actually, to the Centennial Conference of Hind Swaraj in 2009 here in Delhi, and fortunately was able to have that paper, my paper, published many years later, which was called Reading Hind Swaraj in Tehran. But during my several years of house arrest, during several years of house arrest in Tehran, I had ample time to think about some of the key assumptions in Gandhi's political philosophy that continue to perplex me. In this brief talk, I want to share with you some of these ideas, not as definite conclusions, but in the spirit of exploration and discipleship. I am keenly aware that my ideas are faltering remarks, and they're really perhaps superficial. But my only defense is that I'm engaged in what I believe is faith-seeking understanding. But that, unfortunately, sometimes understanding is harder than faith. So as we say in Persian, with permission of those in the audience who have more knowledge and wisdom than me, ba ijazeh, I will offer these remarks. As we all know, Gandhiji was a deeply spiritual and religious thinker. He was also, in many ways, a realist, ruthlessly exposing the negative characteristics and dishonesties of economic and political institutions. Yet it is striking how these pessimistic assessments, we heard just recently in the previous speaker about his awareness of violence. It's striking how these pessimistic assessments sit side by side with an essential idealism, which is convinced of the possibility, in Gandhi's words, of, quote, transmuting ourselves into gold by leading a life of virtue. But, I ask myself, how did he bring these two dimensions together? Given these contrasting insights, should we be pessimistic or optimistic about the capacity of people and institutions to live up to the requirements necessary for spiritual and social progress? What is the right mix of realism and idealism best suited to craft the policies we need to achieve humane development? What was not clear to me was how Gandhi or his contemporary followers saw these two dimensions fitting together, these two dimensions of realism and idealism. I began to wonder whether Gandhi's assumptions in this regard exhibited a troubling inconsistency, which would have to be rectified if we are to make his insights relevant for the challenges we face today. This is the question I hope to answer, however schematically in my brief presentation here. Now, some interpreters hold that Gandhi succeeded in transcending these opposites into a holistic synthesis by drawing on Vedanta philosophy. Other scholars contend that Gandhi's transformational realism resolves these tensions in and through his model of disciplined ethical action, satyagraha. In contrast to these positions, I want to explore a somewhat different argument. In my view, there are two distinct ethical models inside Gandhi's philosophy and practice. There is the more familiar one of moral perfectionism, which I suggest sits in an uneasy tension with the second strand that I have coined spiritual realism. My contention in this talk is that we can find in Gandhi's thought and practice clues to how to put these two dimensions together, connecting the realism of limits with the idealism of possibilities. And we can put them together in a way that makes sense for contemporary circumstances. I say clues because while there are insights we can take directly from Gandhi, others need to be amended in the light of experience and new knowledge. And yet in other areas, I believe, we need to depart, perhaps, from his model. My thesis, then, is that spiritual realism is better suited to meet the challenges of humane development today. I'm going to illustrate my claim by applying this hypothesis to a concrete example: the challenges of urban life that are facing the people of the world's cities, and with reference to the domains of the economy, politics, and group behavior. Now, before I go on, a quick explanation about the origin of the term spiritual realism. I derived this concept from Reinhold Niebuhr's notion of Christian realism. Niebuhr was an American Protestant theologian who in 1932 published an extremely influential interpretation of Gandhi's model of nonviolent resistance. Niebuhr's work was a direct influence on Martin Luther King Jr. and on the American civil rights movement as a whole. I extend Christian realism first into religious realism so as to encompass the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism and Islam, and then extend again, more controversially I admit, to include Eastern religions. Unfortunately, I don't have time here to justify this conceptual innovation. I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss the cogency or illegitimacy of this move on another occasion. So, let me preview my thesis in a nutshell. I argue that because of the unresolved tension in Gandhi's theory and practice, Gandhi's realism made him overly skeptical of the ability of modern capitalism to improve people's basic quality of life. As you're all aware, he was deeply negative about the effects of industrialization on human psychology and also on social development. So I'm arguing that his realism made him overly skeptical of the ability of industrialization and capitalism to improve people's basic quality of life. I also argue that it made him unduly cynical of the ability of modern democratic political systems to ensure social order and some modicum of justice. And then conversely, I argue that his idealism led him to be overly optimistic about the capacity of individuals to transcend the egocentric and immoral aspects of collective group life. Spiritual realism, I suggest, can avoid these problems a little better. Now, let us contrast these two paradigms of moral perfectionism and spiritual realism when applied to the three domains of the economy, politics, and group behavior. With respect to the capitalist market, my argument, in contrast to Gandhi's more left-wing followers today, is that we are justified to be somewhat more positive about the enormous improvement capitalist development has brought to the quality of life of many poor people throughout the world. I added some slides because I knew there was going to be a large group of students in the audience. So just to show you that between 1820 and today, the red is the decline of people, a proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty. So this is extremely drastic drop in people living extremely in extreme poverty. The contrasting experiences of China and the Soviet Union, or South and North Korea, one accepting and the other rejecting capitalist markets, seems to me to be dispositive on this point. In case you worry about broader measures of well-being beyond GDP, it turns out, surprisingly, that even some of these broader measures, such as the Human Development Index, which you know is based partly on Professor Amartya Sen's capabilities model of development, it turns out, surprisingly, are quite closely correlated with just simple overall growth output measures. Here is a graph which shows the general relationship. This is Human Development Index. This is just GDP per capita. This is a general trend, and I could share with you later there are econometric analysis which shows, in fact, quite a high degree of correlation. For those of you who know statistics, there are R-squareds that are above 0.8, above 0.9. So, in fact, it turns out that increasing just simply growth can help also other broader indexes. I'm not here to be a booster for capitalism or markets. My point is simply that if we care about giving poor people more access to the basic necessities of life, economic growth through well-regulated and thus not neoliberal markets must be a basic component of the solution. We will see how this is very important for the future of cities. So that's the first point about the economy. We encounter similar difficulty when we turn to Gandhi's assessment of democratic political systems. Here, Gandhi's realist critique, like Marx before him, successfully exposed how political systems are prone to be captured by self-serving politicians and special interests. As the old saying goes, politicians are the same everywhere. They promise to build a bridge even where there is no river. In fact, the skill of authoritarian regimes to manipulate an electoral system and to disorganize opponents usually far outstrips citizens' ability to force governments to be accountable and responsive. This capability has expanded enormously since Gandhi's time. Now, consider this, by the way, I wish that this had been bigger, but consider this astonishing discovery of research. This, by the way, is the NASA picture of lights of India at night. The research has shown that Indian states, and this is probably very apropos given where we are today, Indian states get brighter shortly before elections, suggesting politicians pressure power companies to minimize blackouts. In fact, the ability to calibrate these manipulations are so strong that the research shows that the effect of this is strongest when the governing party is defending a slim majority. Anyway, just as with markets, I believe we need to be more realistic in some ways and less utopian in others, especially if contemplating alternatives to liberal democratic systems. As one scholar has observed, Gandhi's moral perfectionism did not look to political institutions to check, harness, or moderate the most unstable and dangerous passions, those negative behavioral dispositions that Gandhi was so clear-eyed about, and that his discipline action was intended to ameliorate. The question, though, is, can ethical perfectionism by itself support an effective liberal democratic political system which provides basic order and basic liberties? Evidence from a variety of social science sources suggests otherwise. These include studies of biases in human cognition, public opinion research documenting voters' persistent so-called rational ignorance of political realities, philosophical accounts of the entrenched propensity towards the will to power to dominate others in the human psyche, not to mention the opaqueness and complexity of the trade-offs involved in policy making. It's very hard to penetrate and understand exactly some very difficult trade-offs that governments do. I mean, we all focus on some very obvious things, but think about banking regulation that probably affects our lives a lot. I mean, how easy it is to understand that. So these are all the variables that prevent political systems from working as well as we would hope them to work. As has famously been said, if men and women were angels, there'd be no need for government. And since we cannot count on government power to be angelic, devices for checking that power will have to depend on a countervailing power. Now, this is a critical point. If we have to counter power with other power, then what Gandhiji called soul force, or a pure ethical morality, by itself is probably not adequate to check this kind of, power must check, checks and balances of power. And in fact, Dr. Priyanta before mentioned the idea of being realistic about deterrence. And I think this idea of the balance of forces is something that the spiritual realism I'm referring to takes on board more than I believe the moral perfectionism does. Now, I call moral perfectionism a form of heroic idealism because it clings to the possibility of entirely transcending a modus vivendi of competing interests by recourse to moral resources alone. By contrast, the tragic sensibility, what I call the tragic sensibility, that imbues spiritual realism, insists on making this distinction between the pursuit of ultimate truths of spiritual life on the one hand, and the penultimate realities of political life, where prudential negotiation and trial and error is the norm. The classical institutional expression of this insight is the separation of a sphere of private meaning from the public sphere of pragmatic compromise and order, traditionally the state. This classical liberal dualism seems unobjectionable as a basic requirement for achieving a social peace among plural visions of the good life, where each group can participate in economic and political institutions without having to justify their visions of the good. But it should not obscure the new reality that modern politics is today more a pluralism of overlapping spheres than a dualism of private and public reason. In a minute, we'll suggest how we can see the contemporary city in just this way. Now, talk of angels and devils brings me to the third realism powerfully highlighted in Gandhi's philosophy: the destructive role that passions play in blocking the path towards an ethical society organized only through soul force or love. Having admitted the stubbornness of negative behavioral dispositions, aggressiveness, greed, selfishness, and so on, cruelty even, it is not clear how Gandhi intended to integrate this insight into his total philosophy. Now, forgive me, my wife told me not to use this slide, but I couldn't resist it. So the question here is, when I thought about how Gandhi was to integrate the good and the bad, so the question is here, if we take self-interest on the one hand or obligation to the others, the question is how are these put together in a single person? And here, with deference to philosophers in the room, I want to take a brief discussion. At the risk of oversimplification, we can say that Gandhi adopted a Gnostic or dualist view of human nature as the combination of two immensurable qualities: a soul whose essence is consciousness, knowledge, bliss, and freedom, but whose perfection is obscured by the dross of a material covering, literally the body, and which is the source of these negative passions. This is an almost exact parallel to the Platonic scheme. And I did my best to try to find an image which could explain this. And here on the left, you could see on the left side of the image, so it would be the mind-body dualism. So we'd have oil and water, they don't mix, and the idea of asceticism is to separate the good from the bad. Now, in striking contrast, and here again I want to make the contrast between moral perfectionism on the left and spiritual realism on the right. In striking contrast, spiritual realism conceives the integrity of the human person as the synthesis, not the combination, but the synthesis of distinct and incongruous qualities, but which no longer can be separated, like the image on the right of the slide. So we're green now. I mean, we might be yellow and blue, but now we're green, and you can't separate them anymore. They are just the synthesis. In this latter perspective, reason and passion have a reciprocal influence on each other. And so neither reason nor truth can be fully trusted to be the infallible guiding star pointing us towards ethical action. Reason and the mind needs the shield of institutions, both for protection, but also to amplify the fragile sense of justice in human hearts. As long as we place greater emphasis on pluralism and less on individualism, this is my qualification for democracy. that we should focus on pluralism and less on individualism, we should accept modern democratic systems to be an indispensable institution for modern societies, even if they don't live up to our highest hopes. There are implications which I don't have time to go into about separating reason and passion. But to have the discussion, it would be Gandhi's idea that a politics of truth follows. My argument is that a politics of truth follows from the left-hand model. And that is a very Platonic model in which the mind, because it can be separated from the passions, is really an epistemic center and guide, whereas I'm suggesting that there is a different kind of mixture that we should deal with. Now, where does all this leave us? In the remaining few minutes, I want to illustrate the themes we have discussed by looking at cities and the problems of urban development. This may be a big, jarring jump, but it's what I study, and I try to bring things down to earth. We can start by recalling Gandhi's negative assessment of urban life. Gandhi saw in modern Indian cities a real threat to civilized living. He said, "To me, the rise of cities like Calcutta and Bombay is a matter for sorrow rather than congratulations." He idealized and romanticized the Indian village, and he hoped to reinstate it. But the reality of the world's demographics is that our urban future is unavoidable. Consider the reality. Over the next 100 years, 5 billion people will migrate into the world's cities. And by the end of the century, but certainly by 2200, 80% of the world's population will be living in cities. Consider what that means. Every year, for the next 40 years, the world will have to build an entire New York City every month. That's a Hyderabad or a Chennai. Every month. The question is, what kinds of cities will they be? If they are not managed well, we will have a planet of slums. Now, to bring this down to earth, put yourselves in the shoes of one of the billions of families that over the next century will move into all cities across the world. And that will be including India, even though 70% of India now lives in villages, but there's going to be huge urbanization. What does this family want from the city? What do they want that city to be? Let's look again at the 3 domains of the economy, personal meaning, and politics, and compare our 2 paradigms of moral perfectionism and spiritual realism. I venture that first and foremost, a typical family wants to find well-paying jobs, a secure and clean place to live, mobility to get from work to home and back, and ideally access to basic services like health and education. Then, they want the city to be governed fairly, without too much corruption or violence, and which allows them a voice to express grievances and also to feel they belong to a community. Finally, they want an environment which is existentially meaningful, permitting them to pursue their vision of a good, authentic life, alone or in community. In short, they want the city to be primarily 3 things: economically efficient, politically legitimate, and existentially meaningful. Now, which of the 2 paradigms we have examined is better suited for achieving their aspirations and is more appropriate to their realities? Achieving these goals will require, I believe, first, a robust city economy with efficient land and housing markets suitably regulated in collaboration with the public sector. Then it will require a culture and laws respecting freedom of conscience and the freedom of being left alone to pursue Swaraj or existential meaning, privately or in community. Finally, it will require a liberal democratic political system, ensuring the rights to express views or grievances through the ballot box, to assemble in collective action, or even the freedom to exit by voting with their feet. The 2 paradigms view this constellation of domains differently. All these different domains I've mentioned. Moral perfectionism sees this totality of the city. Moral perfectionism sees the totality of the city, as Gandhi says here in the slide, as concentric circles with the individual at the center. Or to put it another way, as projections or externalizations of the inner state of individual souls. In other words, for Gandhiji, the city is a soul writ large. An authentic city can only be built out of authentic souls. Now consider this is the two models, and again I'm comparing the two paradigms. So on the left side, this is where the city brings in all these different aspects of an individual's life, but sees them really as an emanation or expression of the inner state of the soul. It is a form of holistic, but I would say non-pluralistic. On the right, on the other hand, spiritual realism takes a different view of the totality of the overlapping domains, the right hand of the slide. It sees each of these fragmented and overlapping spheres possessing their own logics and moral demands, some subjective, some objective. Spiritual realism views the city as a mosaic of overlapping moral spheres and the integration of different life contexts with their different values and logics. Spiritual realism rejects any claim, contrary to moral perfectionism, spiritual realism rejects any claim for a single center or ultimate ordering principle in this world, even ethical action based on soul force, because of its conviction that the transcendent creator God is the only center of ultimate coherence, and in this world there's a kind of chaos which we have to put together in some kind of bricolage. Let me finish by summing up. So far, I have highlighted the differences between spiritual realism and moral perfectionism by applying these paradigms to the domains of the economy, politics, and group personality. I suggested that spiritual realism leads to a more positive assessment than moral perfectionism of the market economy and democratic political institutions, although accompanied by significant reservations. And it is also more skeptical about the certainty of transmuting human anxiety into virtuous action. I applied these results to the pressing problem of how best to organize the cities of an urban world, proposing that spiritual realism takes better account than moral perfectionism of the social and institutional pluralism confronting ordinary families as they seek to integrate these distinct domains into a meaningful life. Let me end by pointing to what these two paradigms share and which sets them apart from their most compelling rival philosophy, political liberalism. Both moral perfectionism and spiritual realism retain a profound spiritual critique of any given society. Gandhi would surely have agreed with Niebuhr's warning that no society, not even a democratic one, is great enough or good enough to make itself the final end of human existence. And however fragmented the current reality might be, spiritual realism and Gandhi's life and practice surely overlap in the conviction that the true end of human life is solidarity. And that however broken or divided we are, ultimately, life culminates in the ideal possibility of perfect love. Gandhiji showed us the elements of such an adequate vision, I believe. It falls to us, 70 years after his death, to assemble these elements into a consistent philosophy of spiritual realism relevant for meeting people's most immediate needs as well as their highest aspirations. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Professor Kian for his insightful inputs through an even louder round of applause, please. I would now like to invite an esteemed faculty member from the Department of Political Science, Professor Shubh Kirti, to deliver the vote of thanks for this session.
Thank you. A very warm welcome to all the students, all the esteemed, wise people around. I feel humbled today to have this opportunity to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of Department of Political Science, Shaheed Bhagat Singh College. First of all, I would like to thank Shri Shakti Sinha, Director NMML, for his timely, humane, and overwhelming support to this endeavor. Next, our inspiration, our new leader, somebody who makes us feel at home, who's ready to walk the extra mile for the students and his colleagues. Please give a huge round of applause for our principal, Dr. Anil Sardana. Sir, you are someone we look up to, we idealize, and being a student of the same college today, I know how proud you must be watching your students, your colleagues, and your college improving leaps and bounds in so more than 4 decades of your service for the college. Next, and one of the most important participants, as well as the keynote speakers, right now we witnessed one of the most fascinating presentations on Gandhian views on spiritual realism and how you can go ahead and add Gandhi's ideas to better this world by also internalizing yourself and your experiences in life. Thank you, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay and Professor Kian. I will never forget the drive I had with the two of you. Professor Upadhyay enlightened me about the realities of life which is to come as an academician. Professor Kian promised me that he will break my inhibitions today, which he rightly did. I'm so proud to be to meet you and to have known you. And Dr. Simple Mohanty, needless to say, has led this endeavor since the beginning, along with all our senior faculty who have equally contributed to make this event a grand success for all of us and a grand example of learning and teaching process. Madam Mohanty, we shall always be proud of you for your hard work, for your commitment, for your encouraging words personally as well as to the team, to always have our back when we fell, when we did something wrong. You were there to correct us and help us. Thank you so much for being there. And when I was a student of this college, our principal sir used to say the term Bachcha Log. So our Bachcha Log, thank you so much. Thank you, dear students, for coming here, for making this possible. A huge round of applause to the team of volunteers. I'll not take names because I might forget some names. For me, all of you are equal. Thank you so much. And at last, because this is on Mahatma Gandhi, I have some lines. We had a saying that in Delhi University, no speech is complete without Dushyant Kumar. So it's a short poem, a part of it for Mahatma Gandhi. मैं फिर जन्म लूंगा, मैं फिर जन्म लूंगा, फिर मैं इसी जगह आऊंगा, मैं फिर जन्म लूंगा, फिर मैं इसी जगह आऊंगा, उचटती निगाहों की भीड़ में, उचटती निगाहों की भीड़ में, आभावों के बीच, उचटती निगाहों की भीड़ में, आभावों के बीच, लोगों के छत विछत पीठ सहलाऊंगा, मैं फिर उग आऊंगा, मैं इसी जगह आऊंगा. थैंक यू.
Outside.
Thank you so much, sir. That was indeed an informative session. And now invite everyone to step outside for our high tea break, post which we shall continue with the insightful discussions.